All right, guys, we'll see you next week. Until then, adios.
Count Floyd here. Oh, boy, it's going to be scary. So don't forget your 3D glasses. Otherwise, you'll see it in 2D. Oh! Half D. Yeah, it's going to be scary any way you look at it.
Conversations from the Dark Side.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this, the first episode in the 2024 season of Conversations from the Dark Side, a show where we'll talk about the paranormal, the occult, science, fantasy, and any number of bizarre topics, anything we could think of. My name is Amigo Aaron. I'll be your co-MC for this evening. Today, I'm joined by a man that won't hesitate to suck your blood. Please welcome Rob DRAC O'Hara.
Oh, I see what you did there. I feel like I missed an opportunity to have some plastic vampire teeth for the night, but I don't. Do they have those in adult sizes? I just see kid sizes.
Oh, they have them. Take my word for it. I knew a guy that had them custom made for his mouth by the dentist. They cost about $1 zillion too, but you could do it if you're so inclined.
I think all you had to say is I know a guy,
yeah,
and I believe you.
You know, classy Freddie Blassie, when he went to Japan, he played a character called the Vampire, and he had his teeth filed down in the fangs. And when he bit a Japanese wrestler on national TV, people in the crowd died. They died of fright. Yes, that's a true story. So,
Really?
in case you were wondering, the topic of tonight's conversation from the dark side will be vampires and vampire lore. We're going to touch on sort of the origins of the vampire lore through history, some modern stories about the vampire, vampires in film and our pop culture. It's all vampires all the time tonight, and it should be a lot of fun. Flack, why do you think that here we are in 2024? I mean, we got VR goggles. We've got, you can make anything you want in your microwave. You can have anything you want in your computer. You can do anything you want. Why are vampires still lingering in our minds?
I think it has to do with vampires are scary, right? They're undead, they're monsters, they can hurt you or whatever, but there's also that romantic side to vampires. They can seduce you. They are very slick. They come in, they don't jump out from behind something, boo, get you, they invite you over and they come in, and they have all that. And so I think that is part of what plays into it. Plus, there's always that thing of being able to live forever. There's strings attached. I would say that we may talk about some of those strings, but just that, of all the monsters out there to be, wouldn't you say that being a vampire is probably, if you had to be a monster, would you say vampire is the best one?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, if you don't count something like the Highlander, for example, which that's sort of like being a vampire without the having to drink blood. Of course, there's always the guys hunting you would be a bummer. But if a vampire, I don't know if you've ever read the book, The Vampire Lestat, but it was Tales of the Body Thief, the sequel. Lestat's being interviewed by this guy. Lestat's a vampire. And the entire book, the guy interviewing Lestat keeps bugging him. Come on, make me a vampire, make me a vampire, make me a vampire. And finally at the end, Lestat gets so mad, he just bites this guy. And the second he bites him, this guy becomes a jerk. And Lestat knew it was going to happen. That is me. I would just bug a vampire until they bit me. And then I would be the biggest arrogant jerk vampire of them all. That's the plan.
I think, a lot of vampire movies, things like that, like it's always, like it's because they flaunt their vampirism, you know, they're out there in the open, or they're murdering people in a town that's, you know, drawing attention to them. Like, I think if you just go, you know, live out in the sticks somewhere and you know, invite the random homeless guy over and then have him for dinner, you know, like, you know, I think there's better ways to do it than the way that some of the vampires in the movies do it.
You know, the problem is clearly you don't live in the sticks, because there's not a lot of, there's not a big homeless problem out there. If a guy could live in a freaking barn. So I mean, if I thought maybe you're gonna say something like feed on livestock or something, you know, or what you could do is just find a couple of hicks and just say, listen, here's some meth. You just occasionally come around and let me bite you before you take it. And let me tell you something. There'd be rednecks lining up at your door, ready to come down the pike. You know, so that's the way we go down in the sticks. So we might as well just get into it, Flack. We've got a lot of different ideas for to talk about tonight. Now we think the best way to start. I think the best place to start, now this seems sort of generic, but I think it's something we have to do, is just talk about what is a vampire, what makes somebody a vampire, and what can or can't you do as a vampire.
No, of course it's changed over the years, right? Like there's, it's kind of like the same thing with zombies, right? Like you had Night of the Living Dead zombie, right? But then you have you know, I mean, eventually, but then people are like, "Oh no, these zombies could run." Like now you got fast
they can
zombies.
Sprint.
You got, like,
I mean, they run better than me.
Yeah. No.
Like that's depressing. You know how depressing that is as a human.
So you know, I mean, like I think of the original vampire story as being Dracula.
Yeah.
Now, of course, we know now that I mean, in lore, vampires were around. Like, I mean, there's evidence. I mean, those types of stories like 1000 AD, you know what I mean? So it's the concept has been around for a long time, but as it went on, you know, as it kind of became like, you know, into Anglo-Saxon, I guess you would say, like history and things started getting added, like crucifixes, you know, like they can't be around crucifix. I mean, I guess I'd start at the beginning and say vampires are undead creatures, right? They live forever. They can't be out in the sun, right? The sun will kill them. So they only go out at night. You know, they have to sleep in their coffin, right? And isn't there something about they have to have a specific kind of dirt or something in their coffin? I don't know if that's a part of it. You got holy water. That's a problem. What else?
Occasionally, like a silver is involved. I've heard that one. You know?
Yeah. Oh, and garlic. Like garlic was a big thing but then that kind of seems to get dropped over time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it just depends. And then of course the big one, no reflection in the mirror. There's always got to be that shot in the movie or something. I mean, that's going to be the real tip. Like they'll get around the holy water. They'll get around the, you know, there's always something. And then there's always the Twilight Zone thing, which is, they can only come in if you invite them in.
Oh, yeah.
Which I feel like I have eternal, like I don't invite anybody into my house. Nobody's welcome. Nobody comes over here. And so I just feel like if everybody in the whole world's a vampire, and then they're all like, oh, there's that one guy that just doesn't invite anybody over.
So you're incredibly lonely, but if there are vampires, you're safe. If that's what you're saying.
I'll text with them. They can send me a text. But
you know,
I don't want people...
a lot of what we, of course, a lot of what we talk about is like your classic vampire lore. I was doing a little research for the show over at Teresa's Haunted History. She has an interesting article here where they talk about vampires from all over the world, and some of these, God only knows how you'd stop them. Just a few examples: the Ataru are the Ashlandi vampires, but they drink blood through the victim's thumbs. Which is
whoa,
that's kind of a weird one.
Really bad for hitchhikers.
No kidding. Or if you're doing the double hitchhiker, you get you on the dance floor. There's one called the Baytal. This is an Indian vampiric spirit, and this thing is 4 to 4.5 foot tall, half man, half bat, and it's known to live in a corpse and then basically use the corpse like to drive around. So there you go. That would be something. Of course, I don't
Yeah.
know if they have to get someone their size or they could jump into a bigger guy. It'd be one thing to wonder.
Yeah.
About.
Well, what was that? The first Men in Black, where he was like wearing an Edgar suit.
Yeah,
So
that's
it'd be
exactly-
like that.
Exactly what I was
Covering
thinking.
like that. There's a big zipper on the back or something.
There's a Mexican vampire witch called a Sabatito. And these things they do a lot of the more witchy stuff. They hold Sabbaths at the crossroads. They take revenge upon living children and by causing the infantile paralysis of death. Which, and that's where they get them. I guess they suck them and then they hose them. The old suck and hose on the poor little kids.
I thought that was a type of chill. I think those are Sabritones.
Yep.
I think those are Mexican. That's different.
Get your head out of the Mexican food restaurant there, Flack.
You don't want to mess up when you're ordering. What was the Mexican witch thing called again?
Civitatio.
Yeah, so you don't want to order that. You're like, I want right now at my table, I want a Cevitatio. And then he shows up and you go, whoa. I thought I was gonna...
Where's the nearest crossroads at? So here's one, the dodo. That sounds innocent enough. It's the spirit of a West African man who dwells in haunted forests, and he just hangs out waiting to attack and eat its living victims. Oh, by the way, it can shapeshift, and it prefers to manifest as a snake or Sasquatch-like creature.
Oh, my.
But get this, he can't cross running water, so they built that into him. That's kind of
yet
crazy.
another thing, right? So it doesn't even have to be running holy water,
right? No,
just running water.
Yeah, just running water. I mean, open up the tap, if you know what I mean, or get the water hose out.
Which explains the low number of vampire attacks at Niagara Falls.
That's right. If you're on the Maid of the Mist, you're safe. You don't have to anything to worry about.
Safe.
There's a ton of these things. Maybe we'll talk about a few more of these on down the line. But it's funny to think that you've got all these different vampire creatures or spirits throughout the world, and they're not 100% totally dissimilar. It's sort of like the same sort of thing that happens with like the Sasquatch legends. Like everyone sort of got one. Like why? Where did they come from? Why do they exist? It makes you wonder if something that had vampiristic characteristics didn't exist before written history was taken or whatnot.
Well, I know that a lot of people point back to Vlad the Impaler. That comes up a lot whenever you see these types of historical things. And I didn't think Vlad, like when I heard about, when I was a kid, of course, everybody, if you're kids like us, I'm reading some Time Life book or something. It's like, hey, there's this guy that used to, decapitate. That's what I remember is he decapitated his victims and put their heads on top of like the fence around his castle or whatever.
The old pike gimmick.
Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's where the word spike. No, I don't know. Where I'm going with that, but
not 100% historical accurate.
Maybe not. This may not. Is like we're as accurate as AI.
I always heard that old Vlad. Maybe I don't know if you were heading down this road, but first of all, Vlad scared the crap out of me when I was a kid. And they have all these I don't know where they get these like ancient artwork or these depicting the events that happened allegedly. But I know Vlad would have like that forest of guys impaled, like he was the impaler. He would impale a whole body on these things, and he'd create like a forest of dead guys. How'd you like to be the gardener at that forest? That's bad times out there. But that right there scared me. Just the thought of being suspended on a pike, like in your torso, that sounds like a horrible way to go.
Well, the one that I remember, like there was pictures like that would be wood carving. And that's what I used to think about is somebody spent, 6 months carving this picture of Vlad the Impaler, but yeah, so, and I think like, I don't know why, but like Vlad and then like Dracula and like all those words that kind of feel similar, you know what I mean? So, I know there's a lot of references back to him. I want to ask you what, like when you were a kid, maybe, or like, what was your first exposure to vampires? Like, do you remember like the first movie you saw with a vampire, or first, TV show or something with a vampire?
Well, it would almost certainly have been a cartoon. It's probably a Bugs Bunny cartoon, or I mean, I can think of a couple that their Dracula appeared. Abracapocus, and he kept turning from a bat into a and the rock would fall on him. So, but I mean, the thing is, you're not scared of that guy. I mean, Bugs Bunny's humiliating this idiot.
Sure,
Same reason I don't run away from people with shotguns. But that's not a good life lesson from Bugs Bunny. But I think I've mentioned this before, but I mean, it's ingrained in me. The first time I was scared of vampires would have been at my granny's house. My granny had HBO, which we didn't have. We didn't have cable. And the adults turned on the TV, turned at the HBO, and they left the room. So they left poor idiot Aaron sitting there. And what was on the TV but Salem's Lot, the old Stephen King thing. And there's a scene in that, a couple scenes where the vampires are like flying outside a dude's window,
Yeah.
And I mean, and so it ruined my childhood in some ways, because until I was in high school, I couldn't sleep with my back to my own window in my bedroom. I was afraid the vampires would get me. And so, yeah, that one did a number on me. I still think about it quite a bit. It was a frightening scene. And when I heard they were remaking that, I was like, I'm not going to see that. So, yeah, that's the one that occurs to me.
The worst thing about that scene was that he was on the second floor.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So now you're not even safe upstairs. I think they redid that, or they kind of did the same thing in The Lost Boys. I want to talk about Lost Boys, but it was the same thing where, the brother who is a vampire, all of a sudden he's knocking on the kid's window on the second floor. Like a second floor, you're supposed to be safe. That's the rule. I remember, like you said, Bugs Bunny. For some reason, there's certain cartoons that I remember showing. Like, and the way that my house was set up was out the front window of my house, you could see the whole street, and that was the way that the school bus came. So I could wait in my house, and then you would keep one eye on the window, and when the school bus turned the corner, time to get your books, your lunchbox, whatever, and head outside. So I could wait for the bus in my house. So I would always watch cartoons. And I remember watching the Groovy Ghoulies. I loved the Groovy Ghoulies, which were, I mean, it was basically Laugh-In, but just a cartoon, and everybody in the show was monsters, So there was a Frankenstein guy, there was a skeleton. I think the skeleton was Bonaparte, and he was dressed like Napoleon. He had the big Napoleon hat, But yeah, there was the DRAC. There was a vampire in that, and so I remember that. And the other thing is, when I was a real little kid, my dad bought me a couple of, they weren't comic books. They were books, but they were graphic novels. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like all the artwork was black and white. I remember that.
Yeah.
And he bought me Frankenstein, and he bought Dracula. And so at a real young age, I remember reading that and just flipping through the pages and being like, well, this is terrible. This is not something I need in my life. One more thing to worry about when you're 8.
It's funny because horror comics were a staple of they were the comic industry for a long time. Like in the 50s and in the 60s, EC Comics, where of course this is where you get your creep shows and your that sort of stuff. That's came from the pages of those comics. And so, and if you go back and look at those things, and having not seen the one you're talking about, I can tell you, having seen a couple of these as a kid, they scared the crap out of me. It was, the art was graphic, and the subject matter was violent. I mean, it didn't necessarily show you ultra violence, but it was violent enough for a kid's imagination to fill in the blanks.
Yeah, oh yeah.
But these were very popular, and then of course the comic code came around, and it literally neutered those things overnight, and it pretty much killed off horror comics. So it's. I'm not terribly surprised that that's not your first exposure. I wasn't into comics when I was a kid, so I didn't go that route, but I'm sure a lot of kids were exposed to all the monsters like just exactly the same way.
The other thing, my dad bought me a book when I was real young. It's a hardback book. I have it on the shelf right over here, and it was called Monsters and Vampires. It was a big hardback book, and it went through chapter by chapter, going through, like the history of monsters in film and vampires and stuff. And so that there's a lot. It's full color pictures, and there's a picture of Christopher Lee, from the horror or the Hammer movies, with blood.
and his eyes had that.
Yeah.
He looked all blood.
Man.
I don't know if they put contacts in his eyes or if he could just do that on command. But he is a creepy looking dude when he's in vampire form.
He is, and there was a picture, as I was a kid, and I don't remember what movie it's from, but it's a picture from a movie, and there's like a girl who's in a dentist chair, and the dentist is a vampire biting her or something, and
that's a double nightmare right there.
I know. I thought, is it not bad enough? You could be at the dentist. Now I got to worry about vampires at the dentist too. Now I got to worry about my thumbs.
If he had the drill out while he was biting, that's a real jerk. You're getting into some Marathon Man vampire action there.
So
good.
yeah,
it's funny
that book,
those hardback books. The early ones I remember that got me, that scared the total crap out of me, were the UFO ones. The Little Green Man incident in Ohio, and a few others that really scared. No, it's in Kentucky. It scared the crap out of me. The ones where they attacked that farm, or the Betty and Barney Hill, and they were all. It was almost like a Time Life thing. But when me and you were both born near the same time, and so you're coming out of the '70s where. Paranormal and ESP and stuff were really on the upswing, and UFOs. And so that stuff would have been around. That Bermuda Triangle book that you saw everywhere. My dad had a copy. I saw there were always books, and I did have some horror books, and they were a couple images that would freak me out every time I looked at them. So I could fully understand that. But that's probably why we're into it now, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's. I've always my personal point of view is that horror movies were like a roller coaster. My parents kind of felt the same way. Like, you get on a roller coaster because you want to be scared, you want to go fast, up and down, but unless something goes tragically wrong, you're going to get off the roller coaster in the same, you're not going to be injured, right? You're not going to be any worse for the wear. And so, the same thing about horror movies. You know what I mean? Like it could be a terrible movie or comic book, and I mean there could be images in there, like you said, that will stick with you. But at the end of the day, they're not going to really hurt you. You know what I mean? So my parents were pretty liberal about watching horror movies as a kid. I wanted to mention. I know this is early, and I didn't get into it later, but were you a fan of Dark Shadows?
Of course, that aired before I was born, I believe, because it was in black and white from the UK. Barnabas and that guy. So
right.
Yeah, I did watch. It's funny, I didn't watch as many of the original ones as I did when they remade it. I liked the remake, okay, although it did. If you watch either one of them, and I've seen plenty of the old black and white ones. There's a lot of soap opera in there, and a lot of like family strife, and not enough like horrific vampire action for a young kid. But like it is neat that a show like that caught on and ran for so long, and it ran for a long time. And if you think about it, coming from the UK, they're not known for like their never-ending. They only have a few never-ending series, so their popularity was there. But yeah, I did catch it. It was more realistic portrayal of what a vampire might be like in the real world. I will say that.
Yeah. I'm gonna throw you one more black and white vampire, and then maybe we'll throw to a break, and then after the break, we'll talk about some more, like maybe some '80s vampire movies. But I gotta ask you about the probably the most classic, or the original, which is Nosferatu.
Yeah.
So what was it, Count Orlok? Because they couldn't do Dracula, even though it is the story of Dracula. But they were afraid of getting sued. I think they did get sued, because they had basically, Bram Stoker, basically said he owned the story of vampires, which of course he didn't make up vampires, but they said it was too similar. I've watched Nosferatu like a long time ago, like when I was younger, and kind of first getting into film and stuff. But about a year ago, my dad had some minor health issues, and he stayed with us for about a month. And when somebody stays with you for a month, I mean, you start watching everything. You break out the old movie collection. You're like, have you seen this? Have you seen that? There's a lot of movie watching to kill that time, you know. And we were talking about Dracula or something. He said he'd never actually seen Nosferatu. I said, let's put it on, you know. And so me and my dad watched Nosferatu like last year. There's so many, because it's public domain, I think at this point, there's so many versions of it, you know. But we watched one that was not colorized, but had like color cells over, like it was tinted, if that makes sense. Because when you're watching an old black and white film, it's hard to tell location. So like when they were in the castle, it would be tinted gray, and then when they went outside, it was tinted blue, and then when they went to the town, it was kind of brown. So it kind of helped, be able to follow the story a little bit better. But when I was a kid, I remember watching this special about monsters and stuff like that, and they showed. So I had not seen Nosferatu at that point, but I saw the clip, you know, the famous
clip, yeah.
Going up, you know. In fact, I just saw on, I think it was like a Facebook ad. It's trying to sell me stuff for Halloween, and there's a Nosferatu silhouette thing. So it's shaped like that, like, you know, where he's coming up the steps. And then on the other side, there's a candle holder. So you light a candle, and it makes the shadow on the wall.
Pretty good. I like that.
Right. I go, that's what I need, more nightmares.
Yeah.
You know, so that'd be great. But were you a fan of Nosferatu? Did you watch it back in the day? Have you seen it?
I wouldn't say I watched it back in the day, but I've seen it in, say, the past 10 years for the first time. I mean, I'm like you. I'd seen the famous clips of him sneaking around or him going up in the puff of smoke. You know, and when you see, he's another guy you'd see pictures of all the time. And I think it was Max Schreck that played that guy.
Mm-hmm.
And, man, that thing was filmed so long ago, but the effects in it are, I mean, pretty chilling. I mean, he is one creepy-looking sucker in that outfit. And it's scary. He is that's a frightening outfit. And when it's funny, it carries over to this day. When you watch the show, you just marvel at this guy, like walking around. It's like, holy smokes, what a freak, you know. And so it's
back
creepy.
in the day, you didn't have CGI. You didn't have. I mean, that's a big thing I always harp on. So you had the actor and you had the makeup, you know, and you had to sell this thing, and he sells it. Like I mean, what's funny is if you watch it, because he looks like you see the pictures of him as Count Orlok, you know, or as Nosferatu or whatever. But there's scenes where he's just walking around during the day, like, you know, and he just looks like a crazy guy the whole time. It's really fun to watch, you know.
Yeah.
And you know, my wife and I have been married so long that we have all these little inside, you know, things like something from a movie, and we'll just pick it up and we'll say it. So it's just funny to us. But in Nosferatu, the one guy, the bride to be, you know, or whatever, her husband's name is Hutter, Hutter. And the version that we watched, it had this real kind of fancy font for all the text, because it's a silent film. You know, I don't know if I said that, but it's a silent film. And so every time she says Hutter, like she would just lay down like she was fainting, and she would go Hutter like that. But the way that the font was written, it looked like she was saying butter. So, I mean, we'll be in the living room, and then we'll come in, you know, from work or something, and my wife will just lay down on the couch and go, butter. So that's our takeaway.
You know,
Nosferatu.
what makes me sad about Nosferatu is just a personal gripe. We have a very rare, world famous organ in town. It's in this church. I mean, it's super rare, like there's two on Earth. And what they do is once a year they will show. They'll have like a silent movie night. I went last year, and it was real fun. But the year before they had shown Nosferatu, and it won't be being shown again because the church people didn't like the fact that it was shown in the church. That angered them. So I had one shot at it, but I didn't know about it. I blew it. But I'd like. That is the great, having the actual musician accompany the actual film is.
Yeah,
we saw
that
a
would
Buster
be awesome.
Keaton movie like that. It was outstanding. You know, it was really. It makes the thing go better. With all that said, we're going to take a quick break for our sponsors. We'll be back in a few minutes, and we'll probably talk about a little more modern vampire action. So stand by. We'll be back in 2 shakes.
You are experiencing Conversations from the Dark Side.
Just a gravel star on a mountain road. From all the tales I've been told, there's a monstrous ape soaked in sap atop a genuine 50s tourist trap. Step right up, that'll be $6. And when the tour bell rings, you gotta trust your luck. No hypertension or vertigo if you wanna dive in that mystery hole.
You are experiencing Conversations from the Dark Side.
All right, we're back. Welcome, if you're just coming in, to Conversation on the Dark Side, our first in a series of shows that will be coming out on Fridays in October. Sort of a channel tradition here. My name's Amigo Aaron. I'm here with the legendary Rob Flacco here. We're talking vampires and vampire lore tonight. Now, Flack, we went over some of the classic vampire films of the black and white era. But of course, vampires didn't just suddenly go away. They stuck around for a long time, well into the color era. Do you have any standouts that you want to talk about?
Well, you know, I'm kind of gonna skip over the Hammer era of films. I didn't.
We could do a whole show on
experience
those.
You could. There's so many, and I didn't experience them at the time. You know what I mean? I didn't find them until, like, I really kind of found my love of horror and films in general and stuff kind of starting in the 90s. So it took me time to go back, and I'm still every day, you know, finding movies on that. But in the 80s, there was kind of this resurgence of vampires. There's a whole series of different 80s movies. Let's see. I've got 1985. Now, I saw Fright Night pretty early. Probably not when it was in theaters, not in 85, but maybe a couple of years after that. But Fright Night is what's funny is I just recently watched Fright Night like a couple weeks ago, and I didn't realize, or maybe had forgotten, how similar structure-wise it is to Lost Boys. It's very similar. You've got the teenage kid moves into a house. He notices next door there's some kind of weird going on, and by weird I mean there's a guy dragging a coffin around, and there's people, you know, going over there and leaving, you know, in bags and stuff. And on the news, they're reporting that there's this rise in murders. And he kind of puts two and two together. He looks through the window and he sees, you know, he thinks his next door neighbor's a vampire. And so, you know, he calls the police. The police come to investigate, and they laugh it off, you know. And so there's one guy left for him to call. And it is, I think the character's name is, is it Peter Vincent?
Yeah,
it's
Peter
common,
Vincent,
yeah.
the fearless vampire killer. Yeah.
Yeah, and so he's like the late night TV show host that hosts scary movies, and he was a vampire killer in a movie and stuff, and so he's like, that's the other guy, and of course he finds out that guy was, he's just an actor, but eventually he comes over, kind of to prove the kid wrong, and then he notices that the neighbor doesn't have a reflection in the mirror, which is something we talked about in the first segment, and then it becomes them having to team up, to get rid of the vampire. I think that was the first, because it predates Lost Boys by a couple of years. Yeah. I think that's the first time where I remember learned the part of the myth where if you other people are vampires under the main vampire, but if you kill the main vampire, then they'll turn back. Like and if it's been less than, or maybe if it's they haven't fed yet, or if it's less than 24 hours or something, but there is a certain window where if you kill the head vampire, everybody else goes back to not being vampires, so.
It's funny because if you think about the end of that movie, not to spoil it, but they finish off the vampire, and he's already turned a couple of the main character's buddies into vampires, and that his chick unvamps. But his buddy Evil Ed, it doesn't work. He's still a vampire in the movie, if you'll recall. Yeah. And he gives him the business. It's funny. Fright Night was a movie I didn't see it anywhere near 85 because I saw the commercials for it. I ain't watching that. That looks scary as heck. But I did catch it later, and I really loved it. I mean, I'm a big mark for Roddy McDowall. I love that guy. I love him in everything he's done. Everything from like Columbo to Caligula. I liked everything he did. And he is he loved this role. I was at a cast reunion at a Scarefest event for this movie, and so a lot of the cast was there. And of course, Roddy had passed away, but I talked to the director about working with Roddy, and they talked about how much Roddy loved it, and Roddy talked about it too. He loved the Fright Night movies, and he said they were some of his favorite things to do. And he actually kept the props from it. He also shot a bunch of 9mm film on set that they've never recovered. They've desperately looked for it to try to recover it. And so a great movie. And it's funny because I personally, this is just me, I prefer the sequel substantially over the first one. I think the sequel to this is even better than the first one. In the sequel, the vampire's sister comes to claim vengeance on Brewster for killing off her brother, and the sister already knows that this guy killed him, and knows that he knows that she's a vampire, so they just screw with him, and eventually they sort of start turning him into a vampire. But the second one's got a lot more funny parts in it, and Peter Vincent's really on point in that one too. So if you haven't seen the sequel, I highly recommend it. Oh, it's outstanding. Right. It's a real winner. But yeah, I think this is a real good flick. A good choice there.
So that's 85. 85. We also have Transylvania 65000, which was not. I remember. Is that Ed Begley Jr.?
I've never seen this one. I'll be honest with you. This is one I never saw.
I that's why I skip over that. But 2 years later, we get what, for people our age, for Gen X kind of people, I think the vampire movie, which is Lost Boys. I mean, we could do a whole show about the Lost Boys. I could do a show about the Lost Boys soundtrack, which I added.
The soundtrack, it was a lot like The Crow. The soundtrack actually outpaced the film in awesomeness.
It was.
Or the Mortal Kombat.
Great. Great soundtrack. And the thing about Lost Boys, well, I mean, there is a lot of things to talk about Lost Boys, but what is there to say? Yeah, you got the Coreys, the two Coreys, Corey Haim and Corey Feldman are both. Corey Haim is, the main kid, and then Corey Feldman and the Frog Brothers?
Yeah.
Have the comic book store. They're the kids that know everything. But it's very similar structure-wise to Fright Night.
Yeah, absolutely,
I mean,
but it does set itself apart in a lot of ways. Because, for example, my favorite character probably in the whole movie is the dude that's the vampire. He's a real amiable guy, and there's a part of the movie where they keep humiliating this poor guy. Of course, at the time, they think he's the vampire, then he obviously isn't the vampire, but he really is the vampire. You know?
The head vampire.
The head vampire.
Yeah.
I liked him. It's funny, of course, the stars of the movie are the Frog Brothers. They stole the show, in my opinion, because if you think about it, the lead character, I don't remember his name, and the chick star, like, they're overshadowed by all the vampires plus the Frog Brothers. Like, they're a weak element in the film, in my opinion. The rest of it's much better.
The main guy, Jason Patrick.
Yeah.
Who's Michael, because who has not, I mean, if you're Gen X, who has not been at a Chinese restaurant and said, maggots, Michael, you're eating maggots. Every time you see white rice, you know,
it's only true 1/3 of the time. When you
right. And then you got the other thing, you got Kiefer Sutherland, and I'm trying to think of a movie. Maybe since he was in 24, you know, maybe I would start there. But other than that, I'm trying to think of a movie where Kiefer Sutherland did not scare the bejesus out of me. He was just an intense dude, you know. Remember what was in Stand By Me?
Yeah, he was
like
outstanding in that. The bully.
Yes, he was. He's just got that thing, and so, the thing is, he's like so attractive.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like, he's got that cool 5 o'clock shit, that kind of beard thing. He's got that spiked hair, and the Lost Boys. Like, that's the first movie that I remember, like, vampire type movie, where we're saying, the vampires are the coolest people.
Yeah.
Like, you want to be the vampires.
You definitely want to be turned, you know.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I agree. And on top of everything else, they're because you're a vampire, you can pretty much do what you want, but they're dressed the coolest. They have the most fun. Remember the shtick where they're hanging off that railroad bridge? Like, that scene's creepy. You don't know what's going on. But that's a well-shot scene because that's when you know for certain that something's going on with these guys, you know, when they're falling through the air and screaming. But it's a well-shot, well-made movie. It's got one of the all-time great endings in the history of film, in my opinion. The very end when the old man comes in and gets his root beer. I love that. You know, had the fridge full of root beer. But yeah, that's another classic one. It's funny, that's your gang of vampire film in the tradition of something like, say, Near Dark, where instead of just having, because back in the day, you could have a vampire, maybe a vampire and one of its geeks. They're the protagonist, but now you've got a crew of vampires. That way you can knock a couple of them off before you get to the head guy. But have you seen Near Dark? This reminds me of Near Dark in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I have.
Someone mentioned that in the chat. I'm not sure what year Near Dark comes out. But it was somewhere in the ballpark of the 80s. That had Bill Paxton.
I think early 90s. But yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is that, you know, vampires, like, you know, you'd get vampire movies, you get 3 or 4 over a span of a couple of years, and then they kind of go away, and you're like, oh, let's go. And then 3 or 4 years later, you get some more vampire, but like, they never really go away. It just kind of cycles up and down.
Get this.
Oh yeah, I have to look up when Near Dark was.
So Near Dark came out in '87, same year.
Oh, okay.
And of course, it had Bill Paxton, Lance Henriksen in it, which you cannot go wrong with those two.
Bill Paxton
right. and Lance Henriksen, they chew up scenery, and Bill Paxton's off the chain in this. But the thing I find interesting is the debut of Karen Bigelow as the director. Now, if you look into her, she directed some pretty good flicks, including one of my all-time favorite movies called Strange Days, which is a great film. It's not vampire movie, but it's sort of it's an Elseworld year 2000, sci-fi drama about guys having virtual reality, plugins in their brains. It was really good. So I didn't know she directed that, but Near Dark, I would put it in the same sort of vein as Lost Boys. I mean, in fact, there's a lot of similarities now I think about it. There's a guy and the chick sort of brings him over to the dark side. But this one included, like, the kid vampire that was forever doomed to be a child. That shtick.
Right.
So I think that's a good one. The first time I saw that, I was pretty impressed with that. And the fact that these guys drive around in a van, I never understood what their goal was in that movie, because as far as I can tell, they're like you, Flack. They just drive around in this van. You know, this is before you could shoot a blog or videos. That's what. Maybe they were just waiting around till that technology caught up to their vampires.
That's the life, right? That's the life. And speaking of, you know, you were talking about like debuts and things like that. I gotta give a shout out to Alex Winter, who has won a group of the vampires in Lost Boys, who's just kind of a background kind of guy, you know. And then I was like, where did I see that guy again later? And you go, oh, Bill and Ted.
Yeah, it is. That is. It's funny when you notice him. You're like, look at that. It's that goofy dude, you know. He did something else. He was in that weird movie Freaks too, I believe, wasn't he? He wouldn't.
Well, yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so there you go. It's funny what you remember. I mean, it's easy to go through his filmography, in all honesty.
Yeah. Jump to early 90s. You kind of get a couple of different things going on, because one thing which was not really my style is we kind of start getting these romantic kind of drama vampire movies. You've got that Bram Stoker Dracula, or Bram Stoker's Dracula, which was 92. And you also got the one that was everywhere was Interview with a Vampire. Did you watch that? Or are you a fan of that?
Let me tell you something. I know I can tell by your voice you're not a fan, but I'm going to pick up the gauntlet on this because I will say, just before we skip over to it, I watched Bram Stoker's Dracula when it came out, and I remember I'm not going to tell tales out of school, but there was a particular evening at my house in Lexington where I was not in a good state of mind due to some things, and I had a party going on, and they all left at the same time, and I was like, I'm sitting there, and that movie's on, and if you watch the movie in not 100% good state of mind, it is a screwy movie with the shadows doing what they want, the eyeballs in the sky and stuff. It scared the crap out of me at that time. So whenever I think about that film, that's the first thing that pops into my head. Interview with the Vampire. So it's funny, I was just talking to somebody about this today. So this show, I'm going to age myself here, but I remember going back to the library to do research. I don't know what year the actual book came out, but it'd been around. And by Anne Rice, and every time I was into vampires at the time. Who is it, right? You're a teenage boy. And I kept seeing this book setting out at the library. I mean, it was always on like a table, or they had it displayed, so I could tell it was a popular book. And I wasn't what I would call a voracious reader at the time, but I kept thinking about this as I was doing other things. I thought to myself, man, what would it be like to interview a vampire? That'd be really, I mean, the concept of it really drew me. I know this sounds it sounds hokey now, but like vampires weren't like they are now. Like, this is back when vampires were mostly still monsters, and they were creepy. And so, I mean, I'd say the book is probably from the 80s. And so I finally lent it out and read it, and it really spoke to me. I mean, I really got into it. And I read all of Anne Rice's vampire books, her Vampire Chronicles there, Vampire Lestat. I mentioned earlier, Tale of the Body Thief. I think it was another one. And I was into them. And so when I heard they were making a film based on the first book, I was like, oh my God, you know, this is going to be great. And if you think about, I don't know if you've ever read the book, but if you read it, you know how it is when you read a book and you think about people and you think, who should be cast as these people? You know, and I can tell you, when they cast Tom Cruise as Lestat, I had the same reaction Anne Rice did, which was a horror. I was like, oh my God. Because I was thinking somebody like I mean, I think that when she wrote it, she had David Bowie in mind, because Lestat ended up being a rock star. And so, and then Brad Pitt's in there. I'm like, and Christian Slater. I'm like, what is this? You know, and I like Christian Slater.
I think that's what turned me off from it. It was like all those like pretty guys, which was not, you know, it just seemed like they were trying to romanticize.
But I will say, whenever when the movie finally comes out, and man, I was wrong. I got to give the guy credit. Tom Cruise did a great Lestat. I mean, he's off the chart. Of course, he steals the film. And if you've read the book, the part that Brad Pitt played is this real whiny, whiny, woe is me, loser vampire that Lestat keeps mocking relentlessly because he's such a whiner. And Brad Pitt played that part perfectly. But the star of that movie was the girl. She was off the charts as the young vampire in that, which was, again, that was a pretty foreign concept back in the day. And so this movie, now they changed the very, very end of it, but it was pretty faithful to the books. I really, really enjoyed the movie. So I don't know if you've seen it, but you might dig it.
I'm gonna have to revisit it. Because
you were gonna bury it, weren't you, Flack? I could tell by the way you were leading into it. You're like, here it comes, a garbage movie.
Because I didn't want that. You know what I wanted? Was Buffy the Vampire Slayer. That's what I was, which was.
Did you see that movie?
I saw it in the theaters, like 92.
Yeah.
And I remember. I don't remember if I knew in advance that Paul Rubens, Pee Wee Herman, was going to be in it. But what a great, it's like the only real role that I think about where he's not Pee Wee Herman, But yeah, you had this valley girl, and a cheerleader, and now she's got to kill vampires, and this guy's trying to train her, and she doesn't want to do it. I loved that film. Now, I will tell you this:
I hated that movie.
I loved it.
The only good part was Paul Rubens, particularly his death scene. That was my favorite part.
Oh
of the whole film.
That's infamous. Yeah, it just went on and on. What's funny about that is, when I went back a few years ago, when I went back to college and I was doing the writing program and stuff, one of the things that all these kids, everybody in those classes are 20 years younger than me, and everything, one of their things that their most treasured memories is Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And I would mention it, I go, oh yeah, the death scene, and they're like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, what? And so they're all talking about the TV show.
Yeah.
Which I didn't see. I was like, why do we need a TV show? We had the movie. I don't need to see it. The TV show, I wrote this down, ran for 7 seasons, and people talk about like it's the greatest show of all time, and it may be really good. I don't know. That wasn't really my era.
Well, it's funny I didn't like the TV show either. Okay, I hated the movie. I tolerated the TV show. I think the movie was. I was disappointed. I mean, it wasn't a garbage film. It just didn't do it for me. And to be honest with you, the concept seemed goofy. So when I heard they were making a TV show out of it, I'm like, how did this get a TV show? I don't remember being that successful a film. Like, how far could you run with the concept of a cheerleader vampire killer? Well, they ran pretty far.
Well, they ran a long time.
I didn't realize that they were getting a top shelf up and comer, that's the show that really kicked off Joss Whedon's career. Now he kicked his career to the toilet a few years ago, unfortunately, because of his idiocy. But I mean, I love Firefly. It's one of my favorite shows of all time that he did. He also wrote the original Avengers movie. So I mean, the guy's got chops. And I've been told that if you sit down and watch Buffy and get into it, the drama and stuff, that's what makes people come back. The dialogue, the drama. The concept that it was not good enough for me to sit through it. My buddy Hose is a huge Buffy guy, so I can see why a lot of people are into it. But I'm like you, it didn't appeal to me in any way.
Yeah, I didn't need 7 seasons of it,
No,
but,
it's astounding.
I got a few more. Oh, yeah. And like I said, people talk about it very highly, so there must be something there to get into, but it just passed me by. I got a few more to kick through here real quick, and then we'll go to another break, and then maybe we'll talk some more about some different vampire lore, maybe local stuff or anything.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Let's see. We've got I don't have too much to say about Blade. I remember Blade was a big deal.
I didn't like it. I didn't like the comic. I didn't like the character. I mean, it was. Yeah. I will say, if you're gonna make a Blade movie, they made one as good as you were gonna make it. But I'm just not a big Blade guy. But I thought the movie was okay. Yeah. I thought the fact this started the trend of vampires as ultra geeks. Like in the old days, like one vampire would mow down like 100 men. In the Blade movies and the comics, just for whatever reason, I don't like them. It's like Blade mows down vampires just like they're geeks. Yeah. Like they just mow them down.
It's the other way around.
I hate that.
Yeah. So Wesley Snipes, that's his introduction into the vampire genre. One of my favorite vampire movies from the 90s was John Carpenter's Vampires.
Yes.
I don't know if you've seen that.
Loved it. Saw it in the theater. and no
Yeah.
one talks about this one.
Yeah,
it
it
was a
kind
great
of,
flick.
yeah. I will say, again, this is a pre. This is it pre-CGI? I don't know.
Oh yeah,
No,
I mean,
it's-
I don't remember there being that much CGI in it, but I mean,
no, but I mean, here's a practical effect when you split a dude in half
Yeah.
vertically.
yeah, yeah. That and John
It's a great
Carpenter,
scene.
it's almost always gold.
Right,
in my
right.
opinion. So I mean, that was a good movie. It's funny. It's been so long since I saw that one, though. I mean, it's been forever since I saw it. But it's one. It was good, and the thing I liked about it was different. It was unique. He tried some different stuff in that one, and the fact that you've got a guy that's hunting vampires, it's basically like a pro. Like he's got all sorts of gimmicks and stuff in there that I liked. I always thought that was a good flick. You've got one on your list here. We skipped over it. I want to talk about it. And it's From Dusk Till Dawn. The Quentin Tarantino and Rodriguez worked on this one.
Yeah.
This is like two movies. It's like they took two different films and then sewed them together. It's like a Frankenstein of movies. The first movie is a heist film where these guys are trying to get away. It's got Quentin Tarantino in the role. Along with who was the main guy in that? It was old what's his name from ER and stuff. I can't even remember the guy's name.
Oh yeah.
Anyway,
I don't know.
And then as the movie goes on, they just happen to stop they get to Mexico. They stop at a truck stop or a strip club in Mexico. Titty Twister, I believe is the name of the place. And it just so happens to be ran by a cult of vampires who prey on the innocent truckers and
Bad luck.
geeks
Bad luck.
that come through there. By the way, how are you going to get any repeat customers? That one would wonder. That's one thing you thought about it. And I think you got Harvey Keitel was in there as well, and it had trying to think the
George Clooney.
George Clooney, and who was the girl in that?
Juliette Lewis.
Yeah, and so you had a heck of a cast. You had, and then some of the
Selma Hayek.
Oh yeah, her I remember. She played Satanica Pandemonium, and she just is a. Trust me, I'm sure most people listening to this know that scene where she comes out and dancing with the snake. It's one of the all-time sexiest things ever put to film, in my opinion. And you've also got some of the goofs that are in the bar with them. I believe the special effects guru dude is the guy with the gun that's on his crotch.
Tom Savini.
I met Tom at a conference. I had lunch with him, actually.
Really?
Yeah. It's funny. He couldn't find anywhere to sit. So I was like, hey, come over here, because I knew who he was. I'm like, get over here.
Yeah. Really?
Real nice guy. And then what was it? His character had a gun. It had a pistol that was like a chain gun attached to his groin. I always thought to myself, this seems like a bad idea,
Yeah.
But
what could possibly go wrong?
This movie really went bananas at the end. Danny Trejo's in there too. Don't really leave him out. He's one of my favorites. What did you make
Cheech?
of this? Yeah, I forgot about that Cheech. What'd you make of this crazy movie? I mean, you had it on your list, so I assume you've seen it many times.
Yeah. I didn't see it when it came out. I don't think I didn't know about it until, the thing was I kind of discovered Quentin Tarantino late. You know what I mean? I think Reservoir Dogs, maybe Pulp Fiction. Then I started going, oh, this guy did other stuff. What's going? And then eventually I saw it. And I was like you. I was like, oh, it's, once you've seen Reservoir Dogs, you're like, oh, this guy is a heist guy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's what he does. So when I saw it, I was like, okay, this is a heist thing. And then, it goes off the rails.
Yeah.
So.
I wish I wouldn't have known the plot. That would have probably made the movie a lot better. If you went in thinking it was just something like Reservoir Dogs, and all of a sudden that happens. I will say it's quite stirring when the vampires come out. You're like, what did I just see? A very I have mixed feelings about this. And while we're on the subject of movies I have mixed feelings about, let's talk about some of the god-awful vampire movies. Let's get a couple of those. I've got some here I want to badmouth. The first one, I love Mel Brooks. I love Mel Brooks. But Mel Brooks put out a stinker, and he did it with Leslie Nielsen and Harvey Korman. I couldn't believe it. Dracula Dead and Loving It. What a dud. Did you ever see that?
You know what? When my parents in the early in the mid 90s, is when my parents got separated. Like I was in college, I was just out of high school.
Yeah.
And it took a long time. My mom, started dating someone pretty quickly, but my dad, it took a long time, but he eventually started dating this woman, and we were trying to support him and stuff.
Yeah.
And so one night she said, hey, we're going to have you guys over for a movie, and by the way, the best thing, I don't want to say the best thing, but a great thing about this woman was she was also a bartender. And so it's like you'd go over to the house and she'd be making cocktails and stuff. It was great.
Yeah.
But we went over there and she had made pierogies and this great dinner. And then she said, also, I rented a movie. And that's what it was.
Oh, man.
It was this stupid, dead loving it movie. And I remember Susan and I were like sitting on the floor, and my dad and this woman were on the couch, and I just thought, boy, this is going to be a long, uncomfortable movie laying on the floor. This movie is terrible.
Yeah.
And I love Leslie Nielsen,
Yeah.
But boy, that was a shoot and a miss.
When I went to see this with Hose, because we both love Blazing Saddles, we love Young Frankenstein, we like Spaceballs. And I did not like Men in Tights, but Men in Tights, it has its people that like it. But
Yeah.
I thought to myself, this one can't miss. So
Right.
boy, were we disappointed now. Another one I want to throw a little shade on is Vampire in Brooklyn. I don't know if you ever saw this one. This sucked.
Oh, is that
Eddie Murphy? Horrible.
Yeah, I do.
Horrible. And one of his bad films that I hated a ton. It's another one I saw and then did not like it one bit. Another one I hated. It was the subs. I'm an old guy. I used to watch a bunch of Full Moon presentations back in the day. Full Moon was just like discount movie house that used to make a ton of crazy movies. They made Doll Man. They made Puppet Master. Those, if you ever seen any of those movies,
Yeah.
They did a series called Subspecies with Sardou in it as the head vampire. I didn't like these either that much. That's another one
I
I
didn't see that.
put on the bad list. You got anything comes off any stinkeroos that you think of off the top of your head that are bad vampire movies?
I hate to say this because there's an entire generation that loves them, but I never could get into those Twilight movies. And I mean,
yes, that's an excellent choice. That's an excellent choice.
You dump like an entire, and I mean, there's not just one, there's lots of them, but golly, like it turned it into a whole thing, like where you team this guy, team this or whatever. And, there's people had crushes on. I was like, what do you do? Like, that's not a vampire. Vampires, they come to get you.
It was sort of like it was like a modern Dark Shadows, that's a poor choice. That's an excellent. The whole series is a dud. I didn't like it. Have you seen the Underworld? I didn't like that one. That's another one where the vampires just get crushed over and over. Anything where vampires are just fodder, it pisses me off. I mean, I'm just saying, vampires are supposed to be super studly. Blood Rain, those god-awful movies from the video game, those are horrible.
Yeah.
And then I'll round out my list with one that was a major disappointment. It was based on Anne Wright's book. It was called Queen of the Damned. That sucked. That sucked real bad.
I remember that.
Yeah, that was another
was that
big
not
dud.
good?
So, I mean, there are good ones, there are bad ones. And some of these are so bad they're good, but none of the ones I mentioned are. They're just bad. So I don't recommend
I'm gonna wrap this segment up with one that I absolutely love. This is one of my favorite films. It was 2008, Let the Right One In.
I've never
have
heard
you
of
seen that?
No, I don't know that one.
Well, it's based on a foreign film. I can't remember what the name was. The name was very similar, but it was. I saw the original, but it's subtitled, like it wasn't in English, and I was like, "This movie is amazing." And then I heard they were remaking it in English, and man, it was. Golly. So I mean, I don't want to spoil things, right?
Yeah.
But essentially, there's a young boy and he's getting beat up by bullies, and this girl who's his age shows up, and I mean, she wipes the floor with the bullies. She takes care of the problem real lickety split quick like. And these two become friends, right? But kind of what you see happening is that he eventually is aging and he kind of gets older and she never does. And so she is, yes, she's a vampire. And so, there's a thing where at the beginning she's friends, with this old man. And what you figure out is that was someone that she was friends with when he was a kid. And then, so kind of her, you think about like, what's the downside of being a vampire? I used to always think like, like from the, when you got that, when if you found that magic Aladdin's lamp and you got 3 wishes, what are your 3 wishes? And one is, I want to live forever.
Yeah.
I don't want to die. I want to, maybe not in this body. Like second wish is, I'll be Brad Pitt and I want to live forever in Brad Pitt's body.
We need a special good-looking vampire to come around.
Right. And then, of course, the genie would mess it up and be like, oh, you wanted to be Brad Pitt from, the Interview with a Vampire. Go, oh, no, I got messed up. But this girl, her curse is really that every relationship she has, she's going to watch these people get old and pass away while she does it, and so that's her. She's always going to be in that kind of situation, and so that's a big part of the film. But it's a great film. Highly recommend.
What's that one called again?
Let the Right One In.
That sounds real good. And I will say, before we shut this down, I'm going to bring it full circle here. Since we talked about Nosferatu, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the movie that was a dramatic telling of how they made Nosferatu, called Shadow of the Bat, which is a great flick. It's so good. It's got John Malkovich in it. It's also got the guy that played, gosh, he's in everything. He's got to play the Green Goblin in the Spider-Man movies. He plays the vampire, but the premise of it is they actually hired a real vampire to make Nosferatu. And so as they make the film, he'll be like, do we have any more scenes with this chick? And the guy's like, no. And then he goes and bites her. Like, do we need the Foley guy? So at the end of the movie, they've only got like 4 or 5 guys left to film it because it's a great movie.
What's the name of that?
It's called Shadow of the Bat. Shadow of the Vampire. Excuse me. It's Shadow of the Bat's it's a Batman episode. Shadow of the Vampire. Okay. I highly recommend this one. I mean, it won a lot of awards the year it came out. And William Dafoe, that's the guy that plays the vampire. They tell the cast he's a method actor, but he is all right.
But he really is.
So it's something you might really enjoy. So we're going to take a sponsor break. When we come back, we're going to talk about maybe some vampires in the real world, maybe, depending on your perspective. We'll be back in 2 shakes. Brace yourself and get your sharp stick and your garlic ready to go.
You are experiencing Conversations from the Dark Side. You are experiencing Conversations from the Darkside.
We're back.
All right, everybody. Oh, yeah. Hey, here we are. We're talking about vampires. We've talked about a little bit about vampire lore. We've talked about some older vampire movies and some more modern vampire movies. I wanted to mention, if you're not following, I don't know where you're watching the show right now, but if you're watching it live, you can be watching it on YouTube. There's a chat there, but you can also watch us on Twitch. We'll be doing this every Friday. The whole month of October, we're going to be doing these shows at 8 o'clock Eastern. And so if you're not, you don't have to be a member of Twitch to go watch the show live there. You just got to go to the URL. But if you are signed into Twitch, you can comment along and ask questions or make comments and stuff. So we've had some different comments. One that just came up during the last segment was from a regular Texas foosballer who asked if we have seen The Invitation. I have not seen that. I think I just looked it up. It's 2022, so I haven't seen that yet. Is that one that you've seen yet?
I've never even heard of it until it was brought up there. So I'm not familiar with that one. It's funny. We talk about all these old movies, but it's funny. I don't watch a 50th of the films I used to. I mean, I just don't have a chance.
It's harder, life gets in the way, but 2022, I know there's other stuff coming out right now. It really is a testament, no pun intended, to the long lifespan of vampires. I mean, the earliest, like literally silent films, we have vampire movies and we have modern vampire movies. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's never been a time really where we didn't have something, like I said, there's peaks and valleys, maybe a few years or something. And there's all kinds of variations, I mean, like we talked about, you've got the real traditional stuff all the way to, the Team Edward. Those types of things. So, but I guess that's one thing about vampires is that, you have that those core rules, right? Like you gotta bite people on the neck. You gotta, stay away from crosses and sunlight and stuff. And by the way, this is something that I think I saw this like on a meme or something once, but it was a vampire who had come out, at night. And he was sneaking up on a guy, and the guy turned around and he said, the moon doesn't really glow. The moon just reflects sunlight.
All right.
So that's still sunlight. And then the vampire looked at the moon and then he goes, poof. That was, so
that is a low end. That's a low end vampire. I mean, that's smart if you're the guy, but I mean, good grief. You mentioned, and I'm referring back to Teresa's haunted history here, but you mentioned that vampires. Yeah. There's a lot of. They usually have the same rules. They bite you and they suck your blood on your neck. So it's funny. This is quite a fascinating read here. This is from Persian Islamic lore, and I'm quoting from the article here. This is a vampiric demon who attacks at night and kills its victims by licking the soles of their feet. In the process, it drains them of all their blood. The palace, which is not very smart, can be thwarted by the use of salt, but it can also be easily tricked. There's a popular legend about two men traveling through the desert who managed to trick the beast. When they went to sleep, they lied down with their feet touching each other soul to soul. The beast came upon them in the night. It could find no souls to lick, and they managed to make it to the next day. How would you like to be turned into a vampire, Flack, and then the head vampire informs you that, oh, by the way, you're the kind of vampire that feeds by licking people's feet? How does that grab you?
I mean, I feel like I've just added something to my new terminology, my new insult. I'm just going to call people a soul licker. Very
good.
I'm gonna ask you a personal question.
Sure.
Do you sleep barefoot or do you wear socks?
I sleep barefoot, absolutely, yeah.
Oh, no, I'm a sock wearer, and now I feel like when you were a kid and you would be like, I literally, like, I would read the worst, all these, I read books. Like, I was like 8 years old and I had a collection of books on Jack the Ripper,
Yeah.
like monsters and stuff. But when you got into bed, I mean, if you had no cover, you were going to die.
Yeah.
Like a monster's going to get you, but you put that cover over you, and it's like protection. You know what I mean? Like it's I don't know how it works. It's like a magic shield. You get over there, but now I got to put stuff on my feet. Like it's another layer of protection. There could be a vampire that comes along licking my feet.
You could go to bed with like one of those neck braces on, like when you throw your neck out of whack. You know what I'm saying? And you could wear like one of those dog fighter suits that they wear when you have to go out and train the dogs. And then you wear boots to bed so they can't lick your feet. Then you can have a good night's sleep, fully armored.
I feel like the only solution to this is I'm gonna somewhere. I think in the closet somewhere I still have my old Return of the Jedi sleeping bag, and I feel like that covers all the like. I get in there like you can't get to my feet, right?
Yeah.
And then I zip up the side. If I zip it all the way up past my neck, I'm covered there. I feel like well, the problem is. I think it's only 4 foot long, so I don't know if it's going to be able to get up to my neck. It's kind of a child side sleeping, but no, I never heard about that. It's funny that why the myth is obviously that vampires take your life essence somehow, right? And of course, the Americanized version, the version that we're all familiar with, that goes all the way back to Dracula, is biting the neck and drinking their blood, right? But it's interesting, these other ones that you mentioned, biting thumbs. That's another thing I got to worry about now, licking my feet.
Are you ready for another one? Here's another one for you.
Like maybe my old dog may have been a vampire.
Yeah, no kidding. Now, here's one for you. If you're scared of your feet, your neck, Incus sucks blood, sucking blood out of your nose. He uses antenna to do it. So he comes around with his antenna and sucks the blood out of your nose. So that's and listen, I'm not done yet. Let's talk about the haunt pair. This is an Asian vampire that do prefer to suck the blood from a person's running sores. So like when you run around, you get sores on your legs and feet. You got to be careful because that's when this guy shows up. To any blisters and whatnot, that's this guy's bag. So these vampires are not only deadly, but they're gross. They kill you in the stupidest way possible.
In a lot of the vampire movies that we've seen, when the vampire comes in and he bites the neck, it really seems like he enjoys it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's like a sexual thing. Yeah.
It's a rush. It's a domination. It's pleasurable. Like, do you get the same thing if you're going around licking people's scabs?
No, I can't imagine like Bela Lugosi sexually licking a scab or sucking out of somebody's nose.
Like, oh yeah, here's a good wound. Here's a good elbow scraping. That's gross.
Now this is one that's sort of near and dear to my heart. This is the Kethekano vampire, native to Crete, the Isle of Crete. At first glance, the Kethekano just acts like an annoying drunk, So you can that could be any college town I hang out in. He hangs around outside bars and pubs, and he's grinning. If you see him and he sees you, and he'll start to smile bigger and bigger, and you get to see his rows and rows of extra teeth. Then he spits blood into your eyes, blinding you. All right, so that's how he gets you. Now get this: in Japan, or excuse me, in Crete, you don't just a lot of vampires they'll behead them, decapitate them, maybe stick the garlic in their mouth. Not this guy. Once you decapitate him to make sure he's dead, you've got to boil his head in vinegar. So there you go.
There's a lot involved in this. There's a lot of, and in the movies, when there's a vampire, and you go, hey, here's what we had to do. We had to drive a stake through his heart. We had to do this thing and turn him into a pile of ashes, all this stuff, But they never see the next day where you got to explain that to the police.
You're right.
And the cops come and they go, hey, why do you have a guy's head boiling on your counter? And you go, it's all right. He was a vampire. He was, so it's okay. Yeah, I know that I did decapitate a guy, but Earlier, he was trying to get blood out of my nose with his antenna. So it was a fair game. That's why I'm boiling ahead. I think that gets you in a straitjacket real quick.
It's funny to think about how vampirism and stuff would be when you encounter it in the real world, what it would be like. But it gets me to thinking that, like, and I wanted to talk about this for sure, so it's a good time to segue into it. It's just, what about people who live the vampire lifestyle? You used to see this featured quite a bit back in the day on the news and stuff. They usually wear they dress in the modern vampire garb, which is like all black and leather and all that long hair and all that jive. Of course, some of these people, in fact, a good chunk of them do, in fact, partake in blood from willing donors and may pass it back and forth. What do you think about this as something? I mean, I can't imagine this having been something that happened before the 2000s, let's say. I mean, if you're familiar with, in fact, this is even cited on Wiki, if you're familiar with Vampire the Masquerade, which is a role-playing game, and I was heavily into this thing back in the day, where you role-play as vampires. In fact, I went to a live action. I LARPed as a vampire one time, so I can't make too much fun of these people. So that sort of the guidebook to living that lifestyle was sort of in the role-playing game in the pages of this thing. I know a lot of people use this as a jumping-off point. What do you think about this phenomenon, Flag?
Well, I think two things. The first thing I think is these people are doing all the stuff that's the downside of being a vampire, and they're not getting the benefits. Like, none of these people are going to live forever.
Well, we don't know that yet, but they probably won't.
If I saw one of them turn into a bat and fly away, I'd say, okay, you're on to something. But otherwise, I say no. All you're really doing is risking getting a disease. That's all I feel.
Yeah.
But the good news is some of the things that we talked about earlier also works on these people. And so if you run into one of these people, you can just cut their head off and boil it. And they're not a problem anymore.
One thing's for sure, you do not invite them into your home. I can tell you that right now.
Don't invite them in, and wouldn't surprise me if they lick each other's feet and occasionally bite people's thumbs. So I don't know. There could be a whole thing. Now, what the thing is I guess I would say, like, there's all. Like you can identify, like, people identify, like, when I was younger, like, I had friends who were skaters, and I was like, I'm gonna dress like a skater. I bought, Converse, shoes at the time, Vision Streetwear shoes, and I, had a Thrasher t-shirt and stuff, and I was like, so I get it, like, wanting to identify with that group. And so it's one thing to say, we're going to dress like this. Like, we're going to dress like people from Twilight. We're going to dress, you know what I mean? We're going to do that, and we're going to walk. I mean, that was kind of almost like what would have come out of goth kind of movement. You know what I mean? Like that. Yeah. So I would say that's similar to that. But then you just take it into that extra step that gets you on talk shows. You know what I mean? Like, that's the part that I'm not. Like, if people want to dress like vampires and walk, that's fine, whatever, But I like why? Like, if you're drinking blood, who are you doing that for? Are you? I mean, you're not. I mean, you're not getting like magical powers from drinking the blood. So I don't know why you're doing it. I mean, it's got to be the peer pressure thing, don't you think? Vampire peer pressure.
Well, I mean, I'm a little bit different than you. Actually, I sort of admire. When I grew up, I knew people in high school that said they practiced witchcraft and Wicca and whatnot. A lot of the girls and even a couple of the guys that would. In fact, when I announced that I was doing this show tonight, one of the chicks I knew that practiced witchcraft, she sent me a note that just said "Spiritual Bee," which was one of these. It was a event that was the stupidest thing I've ever seen between two witches, where they claimed that they were scared of the spiritual bee that was invisible and flying around the house. And so she remembered after all these years. But I look at Wiccans and also your old school Satanists and your vampire crew. They're all, to me, if you're gonna live that gimmick, even stuff like, I mean, I'll even throw in guys like hardcore, like punk rockers. I mean, you're not just picking like goth. You can say like, hey, I'm a goth dude dressed in black, and then go home and watch Gilligan's Island. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But if you're going down the vampire road, or like the hardcore witchcraft road, or the hardcore punk road, that's a lifestyle that you're choosing, and you've got to devote yourself to. Like hardcore, like motorcycle guys, like that's a lifestyle you devote yourself to, and it's no easy task. And so the one thing you can't question on a lot of these people is their sincerity, their belief, because they believe it enough to make incredible sacrifices and risk humiliation and risk being separated from their family by choosing this what people consider a very avant-garde lifestyle. So I'll give them credit on that. But you're right. The problem is, at the end of the day, and listen, I'm not here to crap on anybody's religion or their beliefs, but it's a lot like, I look at this one the same way I look at Bigfoot. Like, I'm willing to believe just about anything, but I'd like to get some action here. Show me your stuff. You're right. If I'm going to go to the trouble, because you've got blood drinking vampires, and you've got the spiritual, psychic, draining vampires. That's just, some of them do that gimmick, and some do a combination of that. I want to see something happen. Like, what are the benefits of this? And don't just say it makes me feel good. I mean, you can feel good any number of ways. I want to see what it happens after you do this, and I've yet to see any proof that anything happens that makes a difference.
But here's what I will say, and I think this applies to a lot of those different things that you talked about, like the different types of lifestyles. I would say the vast majority of those people are not hurting anybody else.
Right.
You know what I mean? Now, they may be affecting, their family relationships and things like that, but like, I've never been approached by someone that's like, hey, can I lick your feet? Or, can I drink your blood? Can I those, like, of all the people that I have problems with in the world, they're not one. You know what I mean? So
Sure.
If they're doing their thing, I don't have a problem with them doing it. I don't fully understand the desire to want to do it, but I'm like you, like if they are that into it, and that goes for all the stuff. I mean, like, just like what you were saying, like Wiccan. Like, I had a friend who was like, hey, I'm Wiccan, and I do the, and I was like, doesn't affect me.
Yeah.
Knock yourself out. You know what I mean? So whatever makes people happy. It's tough for me to see how that would make people happy, but
now there is something I don't like about it, and I could group a bunch of people on this. Listen, I grew up in the age of a fellow named Anton LaVey. Okay, he was the King Dong of vampires of California. California Satan worshipers. This guy looked like he was pimping. He looked like the devil. He looked like Ming the Merciless in like a really good, nice suit with a bunch of jewelry and rings and crap and robes. You know what I mean? If you're going to be a vampire or a witch or whatever, like, come on. You're already going almost all the way. Like, spruce up the wardrobe. And also the modern Satanists. Like, what are you guys doing? Didn't you get the memo? That's why no one cares about you guys now. You look like a bunch of tubby geeks. Come on, get it together. Like, where's the red suit? Where's the gold buttons and the jewelry? You know what I'm saying? Am I wrong here, Flack? Help me out here.
You gotta spice it up. If you want to, here's what you want. If you want to figure out, like, you want to know what to wear as a vampire, I'm going to throw this to you because I know you will get this reference.
All right.
But you remember the Chinese kung fu movies when they had the Chinese vampires, the hopping, which is not something
the old gimmick
that we talked about.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was I guess that's part of Chinese folklore, was the vampires, and they, I think they were kind of like that enemy in Super Mario Brothers, like Boo, like they could only come after you when you weren't looking, so when you looked, they would all be frozen. Then when you looked the other way, they would go hop, 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 like that, and it's very strange to see, vampires, like how what started, thousands of years ago, how that morphed into a slightly different version of vampires in another culture. But they were snazzy dressers.
You reminded me of something when you mentioned that. we were talking about movies earlier, and one we didn't mention. You sort of said you were skipping the Hammer stuff, but I'm going to call it back because we didn't. We would be remiss if we didn't discuss, since you brought them up, the legend of the 7 golden vampires, which was a very rare Hammer crossover with the Shaw brothers. And this, I mean, it wasn't a very good film. I mean, frankly, I don't know if you've seen it. But it wasn't that good, but it was different, that's for sure. Where it was one bizarre. If you think about the horror of Hammer combined with the Shaw Brothers' martial arts sensibilities, you've got one wacky picture right there.
Yeah, Peter Cushing. I mean, of course, he's one of the head Hammer guys. It was so funny for me when I started going back and watching all these Hammer films and seeing, a guy from Star Wars.
Well,
Moff Tarkin, and then you're like, oh, that's not the only thing he's known for.
Well, yeah, and now you're seeing 2 guys from Star Wars because they play Dooku and or whatever.
Christopher Lee, yeah.
Christopher Lee will do anything for money, and he's been, well, when he was still around, he would say that he's done thousands of roles, and and small roles, big roles. The Hammer movies had it's funny, that European, that UK flair to them that gave them, I don't know, maybe it doesn't work over there. I always wondered that. But to me, they were particularly creepy, and I liked their Hammer House of Horror, too, their TV show, which was also creepy. It didn't pull any punches on British TV, so it's definitely one to check out. But, it's funny, the Asian vampires, I've seen a few movies where that stuff's depicted. They're also quite creepy. It's you're getting, when you get outside your comfort zone, everything seems weird and freaky. Then when you freak it up more with vampires, it's super freaky.
Yeah, they all kind of look like the guy from Big Trouble in Little China. That was kind of their look,
That's I love that movie, by the way.
It's one of my favorites. Another John Carpenter.
Well, I mean, listen, the guy could do no wrong. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're gonna take our last break, and when we come back, we're gonna kind of throw everything together in a big pot, and we're gonna stir it up, and we're gonna bring out solid gold money. I guarantee it. We'll be back in 2 shakes. Everybody, stand by.
You are experiencing Conversations from the Dark Side. You are experiencing Conversations from the Dark Side.
All right, we are back, and this is our final segment for this evening as we continue our discussion on vampires and vampire lore. In case you came in late, I'm your good buddy, Amigo Aaron, alongside Rob DRAC O'Hara. He'll bite you. Don't think he won't bite you. We've got a few things to discuss here at the end. I want to talk about something near and dear to my heart. I've got a buddy that I knew quite well. In fact, we're still good friends. I worked with him for a long time in Lexington. My good buddy Leroy. He was coming to town a couple weeks ago, and he said, "Listen, he's like, I'm gonna come to town. I thought, what can I do with Larry on a show? And so I thought, well, heck, we'll get together and we'll talk about the vampire movie we made. And so I want to bring that up. Well, we sort of made it. I've mentioned this maybe a few times, but when I worked at IBM, me, my buddy Rich, my buddy Shaggy, and my buddy Leroy all decided to each come up with concepts for a film, and then we would make this movie because my buddy got a video camera, right? And so we all submitted our own ideas, and they picked mine to win, and mine was called Vladkula. Vladkula was a movie that was about a bunch of dorks making a movie, a vampire movie. And so it followed the exploits of a bunch of, it was basically filmed in my backyard after work on weekends. And by the way, we got off work at 4 a.m. So, and chemicals were involved in many of these shoots. Also breaking into church graveyards and a number of different things to film this. And we never finished it, unfortunately, but I do have the footage of it. One of these days I'll post it somewhere. But my buddy Rich played Vladkula. There was a double role. He also played a guy named Ricky Quest as the guy who played Vladkula. And our goal in this movie was to, like, it was supposed to be sort of funny, but also it's like what you would deal with these personalities. So basically the people we played in the movie, I was the director, so I wasn't actually in the movie, thank God. But so, like, for example, Ricky Quest's character didn't like the scene where he was going to be covered in fake blood, and since he didn't, the director didn't get fake blood, all he could get was ketchup, so he wouldn't do it because it would have ruined his shirt. So we tied a Fazoli's bib around him, and there's a great scene where he's coming, or we filmed him screaming up in the sky as he's lurched over this corpse, and he's got this ketchup all over Fazoli's bib. You can tell the high quality writing that was involved in this, but it's one of the few creative things I've ever attempted. Of course, I failed horribly, but every once in a while you got to try something different. Have you? You're a famed podcaster, and you've really stretched out here in recent months with your channels on YouTube. Have you ever thought to yourself, what kind of horror movie would I like to film? And we've seen stuff like, low budget horror movies that really take off, stuff like The Evil Dead and whatnot. So did you ever think to yourself, and would a vampire be involved in your movie?
Well, I feel like vampire is probably the lowest point of entry for as far as makeup and stuff goes. Maybe
exactly
zombie, like zombie, but put some cornstarch, stuff on your face or whatever. Yeah. But vampire, I mean, pretty much you slick the hair back, you got to draw in the widow's peak, you don't have a widow's peak, and cape and plastic teeth, you're pretty much good to go. I don't know if I were doing a horror movie. I feel like I would go back. There's a lot of like psychological horror stuff like that. But I think I'd have to go. I got to go old school. It's got to be a monster. It's got to be some sort of boogeyman type story. So it could be a vampire. It's funny that. You're talking about like vampires like that, like, like when we were kids. I mean, like my dad told me a story one time. He said, people don't think that, like, they don't think Frankenstein is scary. He goes, but I saw Frankenstein as a kid, in a movie theater, and Frankenstein was 20 feet tall.
Oh yeah.
And he said it was real scary. And he said, he would his dad would take him to, like, whatever it was, the nickel or dime movies or whatever. They would show old movies. And he said, I saw Dracula. And when he was on that screen, it was terrifying. You know what I mean? So, but it's funny how it went from like that to literally in our little kitchen cabinet, we have a box of Count Chocula. I love Count Chocula,
I was waiting for that to come up tonight.
Man, I mean, when we were a kid, it'd be like, oh, I mean, everybody is basically doing bad Bela Lugosi.
Yeah, or the Count from Sesame Street. So it's very similar.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's like how it gets from being like this scary thing to being, a kid like, oh, no chocolate marshmallows. You know, all right, you know.
yeah.
So-
It is funny, and you brought up a point here. I think it's I hadn't thought about it. I want to get into it real quick, and it's a brilliant point, and that seeing a movie in the theater is entirely a different experience. And even if you've got you've got your own sort of personal movie theater, but I mean, it's a whole different gimmick to see, especially when you're a kid. It's much scarier, in my opinion. I mean, did you remember seeing something in the theater, vampire or otherwise, that just you couldn't sleep when you got home?
Yes. It wasn't not vampire movie, but I went to the movies to go see Jacob's Ladder. You remember
I
that
saw
movie?
that in the theater. Yes.
Yeah.
It was
and,
weird.
You know, I mean, there's the real arc, which is, you know, basically nothing in the movie's happening, right?
Yeah.
Like we realized that, you know, towards the end, spoiler for a 40-year-old movie or 30-year-old movie,
It gets
whatever.
slow,
But
yeah.
right. But the fact that he is slowly losing his grasp of reality, you know, and he starts seeing, when you see those demonic faces and stuff, and that scene where they're taking him through the hospital, and it's just getting worse and worse, and you know, there was a lot of scenes in that just really bothered me, really stayed with me for a long time.
I call that the naked lunch effect, which I saw that in the theater, and I was baffled and disturbed by the weirdness of it. You know, and that's the stuff that does get me. You know, when it's real off kilter, it's almost worse when it's like that. That's for sure. We wanted to, you had a couple things here on the list that I want to talk about. And I actually led the show with this. Speaking of some of my all-time favorite vampires, I loved SCTV when I was a kid. I grew up watching it. And I loved Joe Flaherty as Count Floyd. Count Floyd, one of my favorite characters of all time. Always pitching these horrible films. Usually it's a 3D movie, 3D House of Stewardesses, or 3D House of Beef, or 3D House of Tip O'Neill is another great one, if you remember who Tip O'Neill was. And he always would come in with all the growl, all the moans, and he would scream like a wolf, which makes no sense since he's a vampire. I'm a big fan of the old Count Floyd, and he even made his way over to he was on one of the early Saturday morning cartoon shows. I can't remember, was it John Candy's or Pee Wee, or somebody had him on there. Weird Al, maybe it was Weird Al's show.
Yeah, I think so. So when I was right out of high school, the summer after high school, I moved into an apartment, you know, and one of the things was my friends and I would go to Big Lots and places where you could buy VHS tapes for $1.
Yeah.
You know, and we would so I'd buy these terrible movies, Alice, Sweet Alice, which is a horror movie. It's the first movie that Brooke Shields was ever in. It's a weird one.
How
It's
old was she in it? Was she a little kid in it?
Yeah, she's a little kid,
Yeah.
and the bad person wears one of those masks. It looks like a normal face, but it's see-through, so it just distorts.
Yeah.
It's a terrible movie. And I got Psychomania, which is a biker horror. It's awful. They're awful movies, you know. But one of the movies that I got during that time was a film, and it was called How to Make Funny Home Videos. And it was a movie. I mean, it's a thing that tells you how to make your own movies, right?
Yeah.
But it's hosted by Count Floyd. And so he shows you all these things, it's a lot of silly jokes and stuff, you know, but he tells you the basics of making a movie. He tells you, this is an establishing shot, this is a close-up, you know. He talks about using a skateboard for a dolly, for a moving, a track shot, you know. I mean, he really did break down all this stuff. And so you know, there was a scene where he was on the skateboard and he hit something, and then he flipped and he landed in a pool, you know, and then he was like, hey, here's how I did that, you know, and he showed the camera on the skateboard, and then there was the cut where he jumped in the air.
Did he stay
and then,
character during all this?
Yes. It's him as
I
Count
love it.
Floyd. And he's like in a Beverly Hills house, like with his kid and his wife come, but he's always in character as Count Floyd. So it's a silly one. But yeah, I literally in college, like I made a few, I think everybody that got a camcorder eventually, you're like, I'm gonna make, like I made some Three Stooges and inspired shorts and a couple things like that. But a lot of like I said about like how to frame your shots and do that. I got all that from Count Floyd.
That is outstanding. Every time I watch one of your videos now, I'll think about Count Floyd staring down from Vampire Heaven as he looks on. Of course, he can't die. He's a vampire, but Joe Flaherty can be looking down on you. I love that guy.
I'm going to tell you something funny. There is a when my kids were really young, my wife bought a Honda Odyssey minivan, and the Honda Odyssey minivan was the first car we had that had a DVD player in it. So it had this screen. But only the kids could see it. If you're in the front seats, you can't see it, but they would watch stuff.
Yeah.
And we got a DVD, and it was like haunted something Halloween cartoons, but it was like 3 SpongeBob episodes.
Yeah.
And I mean, for like a year, like I knew every word of these cartoons, but I'd never seen them. Because I didn't ride in the back seat, and then the DVD never made it into the house. It just stayed in there. So every time you start the van, the kids will watch these same 3 cartoons over and over. And there's one, it's like a haunted thing, and it's SpongeBob, and he's working at the Krusty Krab, and he starts telling Squidward is trying to scare him with a haunted story, a Halloween story, and it's all about this killer called the hash slinging slasher. It's kind of a tongue twister.
Yeah.
But he says all these things. He's like, first he will show up and he will do this, and then the lights would flicker on and off, and then he scares SpongeBob. He turns the lights on and off, So anyway, he goes through this whole thing. But then at the end of the cartoon, all those things start really happening, And they're like, oh no, the hash slinging slasher's really here. And at the very end of this cartoon, it cuts to a shot in the doorway, and they have superimposed Count Orlok, like from, the movie, and he's the one that's turning the lights on and off. And then all the people in the cartoon, SpongeBob and Squidward, they all go, Nosferatu, and then he kind of grins or whatever, and then that's the end of it. So all this time I was like, what are my kids watching? And then there's a punchline where they all go, Nosferatu. So my kids, I mean, when they were 3, 4, 5 years old, they knew who Nosferatu was because they had seen it in this SpongeBob episode, And then I eventually saw it. And
it's very similar to the story earlier when I saw it, the Bugs Bunny. It's the updated.
Yeah, it's just you get that childhood exposure, which I think is good because and then they go, oh, what's Nosferatu? What's a vampire? And then they could start exploring into other stuff. Now, one of the things I wrote on here was vampires in music. So I don't know if Monster Mash was probably the earliest thing I could think of. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which was just it's still, you hear it every year. It's a Halloween staple, but you've got what is it? Is it Bobby Boris and the Pickers or something like that, and the Picket, but it's like it's the whole thing. He's doing the vampire, he's doing that same impersonation. Whatever happened to the vampire twist? He just does that, and but that's the earliest thing. I think
you hear that every year a million times. It's never going to go away. The Bobby Pickett.
And he did other goofy songs.
Yeah, but that's holiday themed. That's how you get over it.
Yeah, but he's like, there's another there's a sequel to that song. It's like, and we came back another time. And it's like some other dance. Now we're doing the Frankenstein walk, and you're like, no. It's just you get one hit wonder, and that's it. We don't want the B-sides. There's my dad had when I was a kid, he had a bunch of comedy albums. So he had all the Bill Cosby albums, which I grew up with and thought they were all hilarious.
Yeah, my dad had them too, and I listened to every single one of them. Yeah.
Kids don't want to hear them now, but that's where I heard Cheech and Chong for the first time, all that stuff. But he had all these Alan Sherman albums, which Alan Sherman, most people know him from Hello Mutta, Hello Fada, that was his biggest hit, I think. But he had all these hits about his son, and it would be like My Son something, but he had one that was My Son the Vampire. And he would go, he will drink your blood. He would go through it. It was really funny. And so when my kids were young, I was always looking for Halloween kind of songs that would, stuff to play around Halloween. And that was one that they just, because it starts off with like a kind of a bouncy piano. It's like, dun, 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 dun. And then he goes, blood. And he keeps doing that. My kids did that all the time. They
explain that to the grandparents. It's like,
yeah. Well, the problem is then they go to daycare and they would do it, and then they walk up to the other kids and then they go blood.
Well,
and then they go,
can't make an explanation for that one.
No, and then they're like, Mr. O'Hara, your kids are licking other people's feet, and I'm like, oh boy, what's going on in that daycare?
I looked over because you picked out some tunes here. I'd heard the classic ones here. But it's funny, when you think about songs, you'd think that like songs featuring vampires or Dracula, like there'd be tons of big hits. But like for example, just off the top of my head, there are way more big hits that I've heard of about like Superman, for example, than the vampires. And you'd think vampires are very rock and roll. When I think of a vampire song, the first one that comes into my mind is the Concrete Blonde song. They've got a song that's called Bloodletting, the vampire song. I'm not the biggest Concrete Blonde fan, but it's far and away my favorite tune from them. I don't know if you're familiar with that one, but it's a good song. And then another one that's not that old, and it's funny, I went back years ago to read the lyrics on this song because I wasn't sure what the guy was talking about when I heard it, and it was about vampires. And it was the Toadies' Possum Kingdom. I don't know if you remember that song. Do you wanna die? That song.
Right.
That's a vampire song. But I got a list here, and I've been looking at the list all week. I'm like, let's look at all these vampire songs. Most of these songs are from people I know that I've never heard of. So I guess vampires aren't getting over that good on the Billboard charts. Yeah. No, don't. On the radio. It is odd though, isn't it? Even like zombies had their, there's but vampires can't pull it off. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I don't know. It just doesn't. Maybe it doesn't translate over. You get the movies, it works, but on the songs, I don't know. Like I remember, I was like we had our little group of heavy metal guys, right, in high school. So there was like the Kiss guy, and I was like the Motley Crue and Metallica guy, and then there was that one guy that was the Iron Maiden and Judas Priest guy, so he would always give us like mixtapes of that. And I remember him giving me a tape with Love Bites on it, which I didn't get the pun at the time, but yeah, that's a Judas Priest vampire song, but not one that most people would know, and I remember Bauhaus, which was I don't know if they were the first goth band, but they were the first goth band I was exposed to, which I was not a big Bauhaus fan, but when you drop one member and then Bauhaus became Love and Rockets, and I was a huge Love and Rockets fan.
Whoever they dropped, good move, because I wasn't a big Bauhaus fan either. I'd heard them. I had, you've always got friends that are into that stuff. You got your Roxy Music friends, or your, these guys, and I'm just like, but yeah, I'm the same way. And that's one I did hear. I do remember that one.
Bela Lugosi is Dead from Bauhaus.
I don't know how long they were even around. I mean, did they have a ton of albums, Bauhaus?
No. They weren't. Yeah, that wasn't that long. And you know what? Not to go on a tangent, but Love and Rockets was the opening act on the Jane's Addiction tour that just imploded.
Oh yes.
So
well, there you go.
Yeah, you had about four shows to see Love and Rockets. Yeah.
we talked about earlier. I talked about I expostulated on the virtues of Fright Night 2. There's a song that plays on the credits of that movie. It's a vampire song. It's great. I don't know the name of it even, and I don't know who sings it. It's just probably some. You know how they round out these soundtracks. They like hope they're gonna get a hit, you know.
Right.
I remember like, man, this. I used to listen to the song, the credits. It was really good. You know. So yeah. So you might be able to get on that road, but yeah, when it comes to the music, you know, you're better off just getting the classical stuff that's been used. Maybe you're gonna be good to go there. Are you reading or have you read any vampire fiction that you were into? I don't know how much you read that much anymore, and I don't know what you're into. Did you ever read the Anne Rice stuff, for example? That wasn't your bag?
I haven't, but the interview with a vampire sounds interesting. I think maybe after this, I may go back and read that if I was going to read anything.
It was a fun one. And I it's funny. Before Anne Rice passed away a few years ago, it's funny to think that she wrote the Interview with the Vampire books, and then she wrote those series of basically softcore porn books that including that movie that featured Dan Aykroyd in the fetish gear along with Rosie O'Donnell and you remember that movie?
Yes, yeah.
It's hard to believe that's the same. Those are written by the same person. Although I will say the Anne Rice vampire books get pretty. I'm not gonna say super raunchy, not as raunchy as that, but they can. Vampires they get around, if you know what I mean. But anyway, there was a time where you could tour her mansion down in New Orleans. I always thought that would have been a lot of fun back in the day. It's funny when you look at the big characters in go back to the 50s or the 30s even, where you've got the Universal monsters. You got your Wolfman, you've got your Frankenstein. You've got you've got your usual Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and whatnot. But I mean, the mummy's in there. But in my mind, the vampire Dracula, he's always been king. He's the king dog. He's always the guy that runs the show. In that. And so I guess going forward, we're going to be seeing vampire movies probably from now until Doomsday. Wouldn't you say?
I mean, I don't. Like I said, I think. There's always another little twist.
Yeah.
There's always something that they could tweak a little bit. So it's always something that you're gonna always see. And kind of to what you were saying, imagine if there's a meeting of the monsters. Listen, guys. Here's my Dracula. We've got to come up with a plan. And I mean, you look at the Wolfman, and he's like. I mean, he's no good, right? And then the mummy, he's like, can't hear that guy.
Yeah.
And then Frankenstein, he's like, fire, bad. Okay, well, he's out, So, I mean, really, I think Dracula has got to be the de facto leader of the band.
I never thought of it that way. He's the only guy
making the play.
You're right. He's pretty much the only guy, because even like Jekyll and Hyde, he's going to be okay half the time. Then he turns the crap.
Half the time.
Right. So it's got a good point. I think that's a good way to take it to the house tonight.
Well, I got a question for you that
sir.
I want to wrap up stuff with. So there's lots of all these monsters they have ups and downs, right? I'm gonna be a werewolf, right? So werewolf is during the day you're fine, full moon, now you got problems, right? So all these things, but all things considered, as vampires, if you had this opportunity, if this is a real thing or whatever, of all the monsters or whatever, I guess I'm kind of presuming that of those you would pick, you might pick a vampire, but we'll just limit it down to that. But I guess my question is, would you want to be a vampire?
Yes, absolutely. And for one simple reason, I want to live forever, and I'm willing to sacrifice. I don't know if you're a big fan of Key and Peele. I don't know if you ever watched their stuff, but they did a bit one time where this guy got turned into a vampire. They went to this whole rigmarole about how the vampires acted all gothy and goofy, and he was like, "This is stupid. I'm not dressing in leather. I'm not wearing all this crap. I just got turned into a vampire so I could see future cars." That's the only reason he cared. He wanted to see what stuff was going to look like in the future. I'm sort of like that guy. I'm not gonna wear leather boots that lace up to my knee. I'm not gonna wear a leather corset. I'm not gonna do this stuff. I just want to be around to see what's going to happen later. because I don't want to die. There's also that aspect of it. So I would be willing to forego going out in the day, which would be fine with me. What about you?
I mean, like the majority of the like okay, first of all, I don't think there's a crucifix in this house. So that's not a problem. There's no holy water in this house. Like all the things, I'm pretty sure we don't have any garlic. Right? So I don't like any of those types of things, you know. And I already told you, like when people come over to visit, they go, "Hey, can I come in?" I go, "It's a bad time." You know, not come back later. You need to text first, you know.
Thank God you didn't run Boat Fest. We'd have been in trouble.
Yeah. I just feel like all the things that would be a problem are not really a problem for me. And then they go, "Oh, listen, you got to sleep all day." That sounds great, you know. I don't really know how vampires get their money. I think that's the thing that they don't like, you know, like right night. I mean, maybe when they suck people's blood, then they take their wallet too, or so. I don't know.
Well, you got to get one of these. You know, that stuff like the Lugosi eyeball special. And then while they're tranced up, you get into their purse. That's how you do it. And then you bite them. Okay,
so here's the thing. Here's the horror movie that we put together.
Okay.
Okay. Me and you are vampires. Okay.
Yeah.
We do all the vampire stuff. We sleep during the day. We go out at night. We get our victims, and then we hypnotize them, and then we get their cryptocurrency.
That's it.
So we're the crypto vampires. So that's the thing, is that we survive on blood and Bitcoin.
I like it.
So that's our
crypto from the crypt. It works out great. This thing writes
there
itself.
You go. Tales from the crypto. Yeah. That's us.
You know, I just thought of something. I was just thinking, you know, because I was, you know, you may have noticed this, Black. I'm kind of a big guy, kind of a plus size fellow. And so I can put away a lot of food, you know. And it occurred to me after you asked me about being a vampire, like, would I have to suck the equivalent blood to make up for the amount of food I eat every day? I would be out there killing hundreds of people to make up the difference.
Here's the thing. You got to, what's a nice way to put this? Victims come in all sizes, you know? So maybe you don't hang out, you know, at the Pilates outside place looking for victims. You hang out at Walmart. That's, you know, because you gotta need the full size meal.
You head down to the buffet. That's where you hang out, right outside of Golden Corral. That's a Golden Corral and the 7 Vampires. That's the new one they're coming out with.
You've got the sign on the side of the van, you know, that says free Bitcoin, and then when they come in, you know, you got to get 2 or 3 at a time.
I love it. You know, thanks everybody for hanging with us tonight. While Flack is light proofing his van like they did in Near Dark, so we can head down to the buffet. Yeah. I want to encourage you, if you enjoyed this, drop us a note. We'd love to hear from somebody. We've got several means of communications. You can call the Conversation from the Dark Side hotline at 304-397-0810. It's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, all year long. Automated. You'll never talk to a human. You can also email your questions, experiences, comments, show ideas to thedarkside@mail.com. Flack, it's always a pleasure to spend an evening chatting with you. And we'll be back for our second show next Friday, same bat time, same bat channel. Everyone, have a nice night, and make sure you don't sleep with your back towards the window.
You have just experienced Conversations from the Dark Side. Until next week, try to enjoy the daylight.